Good morning, I'm Cesar Iliano, Content Director at BNamericas. Our 2023 Infrastructure Outlook Report is published, and in this video, our content team will be telling us what to expect from the industry in the next 12 months. Broad macroeconomic trends loom large over Latin America's infra sector for 2023. With inflation coming to a head in 2022, project costs have surged, while continual interest rate hikes have severely increased the cost of financing. The good news is that, while some will lag, many projects will be moving ahead next year, providing opportunities to operators and developers in the sector. The deep need for infrastructure development in the region means the backlog is large and there is no alternative but to push ahead. Laura Suporno, BNamericas Editor for Research, will be joined by Rogerio Gelmayer, our Bureau Chief for Brazil, Javier Gracia, Infra Correspondent for the Southern Cone, and Ariel Rodriguez, Infra Correspondent for Mexico. Laura, welcome.
Good morning, Cesar. Thank you very much for the introductions. We'll jump right in today to the issues that we'll be discussing around the region. Rogerio, I'd like you to invite you to turn on your camera for our discussion of the issues impacting Brazil next year.
Hello, Laura. Good morning.
Good morning, Rogerio. Good to see you. So jumping right in, Rogerio, I'd like you to, if you could tell us, what are the main changes that you expect to see for the infrastructure sector in Brazil starting in 2023, which, as many are probably aware, is an important year because at the beginning of the year we'll have a new president coming in, a new administration.
Exactly, Laura. This is an important question. As you already noted, in the next year, Brazil will face a period of transition as the leftist elected president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, will assume the power for a tenure of 4 years. So under Lula, Brazil likely to see a driver more in terms of public investments in infrastructure after 4 years marked by the advance of a robust concession agenda and the intense protagonism of the private sector players under Jair Bolsonaro administration. However, due to the severe fiscal restrictions that the new administrations face, mainly due to the expansion of social programs since the start of the COVID-19, there is a limited room for a major twist toward the expansion of the public investment in infrastructure. So in general terms, considering the wishes of the new administration and also the fiscal reality, I see a scenario that points to agenda more favorable to the continuation of concessions and the PPPs, instead the advance of privatizations.
Okay, perfect. And going a little farther into that, what do you expect to see specifically in terms of that concession agenda under Lula?
Yeah, let me separate this question in two topics. First of all, talking about the concessions. The model of the concessions in Brazil, which had a major traction during the current administration of Bolsonaro, tends to continue under Lula government. Looks like, of course, that during the first year of the Lula administration, we can see a kind of slowdown in terms of assets being offered to the private sector players, as a new administration tended to use the first year to be more familiar with the full picture, with the full scenario of the country. It's worth to mention that the past administration of the leftist Lula's Works Party was also administrations marked by various concessions programs in the infrastructure side. Due to that, we can expect the continuity of the infrastructure concessions in general. However, regarding the privatizations agenda, the elected government has already declared on several occasions that is contrary to this model. This resistance against the privatizations represents a major problem for the port sector specifically, since the current administration is looking to attract the private sector players for the port segment through the privatization programs of the Ports Authority, including the largest port in South America, the Santos port. And this plan regarding port segment likely to be suspended under Lula administration.
Yeah, that would be quite a big change and quite a big break on a process that has gained a lot of speed or support under Bolsonaro. And lastly, looking more towards financing, the state-run development bank in Brazil, the BNamericas, the role has kind of changed over the last few years in the area of infrastructure. What do you see happening with Lula coming back in?
Yeah, the new administration in Brazil is likely to also mark a new chapter for BNDES history. And it is likely to work more in the increase of the role of the bank in the infrastructure segment, which would result in a more competition against the private sector banks in terms of financing for projects, for infrastructure projects. It's worth to mention that in recent years, the BNDES put a major focus of its activities on the structuring of the concession projects. So the trend is that starting next year, BNDES will be more divided. Its focus is also structuring projects, but also more activity in terms of the financing of the projects.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rogerio, for sharing the insights about Brazil.
Thank you, Laura.
I'll go ahead and invite Javiera Gracia now, our Southern Cone correspondent, to turn on the camera. Hi, Javiera. How are you doing?
Very well here from Chile.
Good, wonderful. Glad to have you on the discussion today. Javiera, looking at Chile, which is, as you say, where we are right now, you and I. What have we seen so far from the administration of Gabriel Boric, who took office in 2022, in terms of the continuity of Chile's infrastructure program, and how do you expect to see that playing out in 2023?
Yeah, so like many new governments, Boric has spent a lot of time on transition mode, which is basically trying to adapt the system to his administration. More left-leaning, more leaning outlook. And we have seen, it's more like he hasn't tried to break anything. Let's be clear about that. There has been some continuity, but at the same time, you can see some effort to adapt the existing system, especially the concession system for infrastructure, to his own leanings. For example, they delayed the tender of a new reservoir because, which was previously halted because local opposition, and at the same time, they reached an agreement with neighborhood associations in Santiago regarding the location of a couple of stations in Santiago's Line 7 project of the metro system. But and it took them a long time to update the concession standard. To give an idea, there has not been no new concession tenders since Boric took office in March. And so far, they have limited themselves to open bids for auctions that were launched during the previous administration, and they didn't release a new schedule until September. But at the same time, I don't see that much concern. Well, there is concern, obviously, among investors, especially regarding inflation, but that seems to be a major issue. So far has been a major issue for local firms, to the point that the Public Works Ministry decided to readjust the price tags of many contracts, and this is estimated to cost like $350 million. But on the concession area, there seems to the attitude so far has been wait and see, and there is an important pipeline of concession projects that will start next year. The plan for 2022 to 2023, it's over 40 contracts, which are worth more than $13.3 billion. And for next year alone, it's basically 8 contracts, which are worth $2.6 billion. And Another thing that is important to note is that this is going to include some projects that were not seen in previous years. We have light rails, we have cable cars, and that obviously is part of the more environmentally friendly agenda that BORC has.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So obviously, or it sounds like there are a lot of projects in the pipeline. The government is interested in continuing with a lot of infrastructure investment. But given this, the slowness in getting the program going, combined with, BORC being kind of more left-leaning, as you say, more in tune to some of the environmental and social criticisms of projects, and also combined with the situation that we've had of high inflation and also an outlook of, very slow growth or possibly even recession next year in Chile. How attractive is infrastructure investment in Chile, next year? And are projects going to be able to get financing?
Yeah, that's not the same, but basically the same question I asked around, and I had the fortune to talk about this with Fitch Ratings, and they were the ones who told me that the environment among bankers and financiers is basically wait and see, not only because of the macroeconomic situation and higher interest rates, inflation, slower growth, and you said so, the possibility of a recession, but also because of political uncertainty. But however, that factor seems to have abated a lot after the September 4 plebiscite, where there's a very, left-leaning constitutional proposal was rejected very, very soundly. And since then, it has been kind of a bit of a dead spot for constitutional reform. So there is interest in for potential financiers, especially in the concession system. There's still a few questions when it comes to public works contracts, which I mentioned before, with the government having to step up and having to readjust a price tag, so to prevent firms from not being able to carry them out because they couldn't pay the supplies anymore. But like I said, there is interest in the market for the concession projects, which are the big ones, with the ones that the big landmark projects, so to speak. And we can expect to see some interest from especially from the external sector. We've seen firms from the concession system has always seen with a lot of attention from firms from Spain specifically, and now over the last few years we have China moving in and netting contracts for hospitals and highways. We can expect maybe it's not that big of an agenda as it was in the previous administration, but there is interest in it, and I don't think we can call it a failure at this point. But yeah, next year is going to be like the big test for how BORC and Public Works Minister Juan Carlos Garcia can do with the concession system and infrastructure in general.
Yeah, big challenges for them next year.
Yep.
Looking just briefly at Argentina, the country has become, shall we say, more and more limited in its ability to advance with infrastructure projects as the economic crisis in the country has evolved or devolved.
Yeah.
What opportunities can you see there for next year?
Yeah, there is some very ambitious public works programs. Also, next year we have elections, so that in Argentina traditionally means that the government is going to try to step up on public works, to have inaugurations and stuff to highlight in the media in the run-up to the general election, which at this point is kind of a big question mark, because we don't even know if President Alberto Fernandez is going to even try to go for re-election. There is some questions regarding if they're even going to have primaries. But even if Argentina is trying to build a road to recovery, it's unlikely that private investors will rush back to Argentina, because that means that they will have to expose themselves to a market that's known for volatility. There's an important, the Argentina Grande program in particular, which has projects for over $6 billion, will have some interesting works going forward next year, particularly the second bridge between Chaco and Corrientes province. And there's but at the same time, we're all, like in Chile, we're seeing a lot of problems involving inflation, because for my job obviously involves checking out tenders, and the reality I'm seeing is a bunch of times where I see bids that are either double or sometimes, hell, even triple the reference price tag, and as a result, the government obviously is obviously in a bit of a tight spot involving financing, and not only the federal government, provincial administrations who often carry out projects of their own, and because of this, infrastructure financing is limited to three sources: the federal government, which also provides money to the provincial administrations, multilateral institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank, and the third one is China. In fact, currently President Alberto Fernandez is trying to get financing from China for an energy project, and as a result of Argentina's a very fragile political and macroeconomic scenario, trying to get financing on the market is very, very difficult. And so even with this ambitious public works plan and the incentive of the election, I don't see private investors going back to diversify Argentina's financing sources.
A difficult year in that sense next year in Argentina.
All right.
Thank you so much, Javiera, for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
I will turn now to Ariel Rodriguez in Mexico. Ariel, would you join us, please? Thank you. Hello, how are you? Go ahead, and I think your microphone may be off.
Apologize. How you doing, Laura?
Yeah, no, not bad, Ariel. Thank you. Good to see you. Jumping right in Mexico, Ariel, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador is entering the penultimate year of his 6-year term. And this is a president who has been quite focused on promoting these large emblematic projects that sort of carry his signature. What is the approach we can expect in 2003 from the president, and how do you see this shaping the opportunities that will be open to infrastructure, contractors and investors?
Well, Laura, as you mentioned, AMLO is coming close to the end of his term. This means his administration will be more focused on finishing ongoing projects rather than starting new ones. In fact, we do not expect any new major projects to be announced until the end of the leftist leader's term in 2024. However, experts consulted by BNamericas agree that 2023 will be a very active year for the construction sector because the government has assigned historic amounts in terms of public infrastructure for next year. Although most of these resources will go to major projects such as the Maya train or the Tehuantepec-Isthmus rail corridor, these resources will go to are expected to benefit the sector through complementary works. Minor road, bridge, site construction contracts needed to complete the project. So yes, no more mega projects will be announced, but construction will remain active as the government works against the clock to finish AMLO's portfolio.
Okay, perfect. And looking still at these, opportunities we might expect for the private sector, the president has worked closely with the private sector during his term to launch infrastructure packages, and there have been 2 packages or 2 phases of the package that have been quite large, but this third package that's been awaited for some time is now looking unlikely to materialize. What does this mean for PPPs, for tenders, and for the advance of infrastructure projects in general in the country beyond these emblematic works that you just mentioned?
Indeed, we received very disappointing news this year after it was confirmed that the government would not present, at least this year, a third infrastructure package until package 1 and 2 showed more progress or maturity. The presentation of the new package has been eagerly awaited since the beginning of 2021, following the announcement of packages 1 and 2 at the end of 2020. And just to provide some context, the first package included 39 projects, and the second another 29 group of PPP projects involving total combined investments of around 520 billion pesos, or some $25 billion. So it was a low blow for the private sector, indeed, which the private sector is mainly in charge of financing this infrastructure plan. It's a infrastructure plan full of public-private associations. But we never know, and the Lopez Obrador administration could still present a third package next year. We just don't see that happening, but it still might happen. And the private sector is still bullish, is still ready to move forward with this package and begin financing and begin construction. Meanwhile, we will just keep a close eye on the progress achieved at some of these projects already started for package 1 and 2.
Okay, and looking at the financing environment in Mexico, what can you say about that in general terms? And also, there was a recent deal with the Inter-American Development Bank, which was kind of a milestone for Mexico. Can you tell us about that and what it could mean for the sector next year?
Of course. See, Laura, with Lopez Obrador, we mentioned Lopez Obrador so many times in the sector because when he came in, he laid out, how he wanted things done. And for example, he was very clear about not acquiring any debt. He does not want to get any loans. For example, his administration has not gotten any loans to construct any project so far. Most of the loans or credits being assigned have gone to the private sector, which is either doing their own private projects or doing something through a PPP. So for the first time in 4 years, an international development bank, which you mentioned, confirmed its participation in one of President Lopez Obrador's flagship projects. This is the Maya train. This happened in July when the Inter-American Development Bank announced financing for up to around $2.2 billion loan to promote the relocation of companies in the Tehuantepec Isthmus region, which is between Oaxaca and Veracruz state. And the government is building there an interoceanic corridor that seeks to compete with the Panama Canal through railway. They will transport cargo between one coast and another. So this is a major milestone. We actually included this in our report, and we actually interviewed one of the heads of the bank, which did not rule out announcing future alliances with the government in the upcoming years. So we might see other development banks playing key financing programs for Lopez Obrador. Maybe the Maya train, this is something banks have said they are very interested in, because one thing is the rail lane that will connect 5 states in the southeast, and other is all this real estate projects that are pretended to be located around the region where a lot of tourism is expected to come by once the project is completed.
Right. Again, part of these kind of auxiliary opportunities to the emblematic projects that are kind of driving some of the opportunities in Mexico in the near term. Interesting. Well, thank you very much, Ariel, for the insights about Mexico. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now to close out today's panel, I will share some comments regarding what we are seeing for 2023 in the Andean region of Latin America. Firstly, in Colombia, we see the environment being dominated by, the recent arrival of Gustavo Petro to the presidency, which could imply changes to project schedules and a political environment of kind of waiting to see if Petro can demonstrate that his government can attract and guarantee private investment. There's a large, Petro's coming off of a long string, or inheriting a long string of projects, the 4G infrastructure projects in Colombia that have been a very successful program. The country's looking to move into its 5G program, and the question is how Petro will approach that. As the country's first leftist president, there have been concerns about how he'll deal with the relationship with private investment. Participants in the sector have said that the big challenge is going to be maintaining the country's institutions and the state policies for the sector. And so everyone is kind of watching to see how these concepts are going to evolve. What we do know is that Petro plans to prioritize projects that will boost logistics competitiveness in the country. Moving cargo in Colombia can be up to 50 times more expensive by road, for example, than by river. So in particular, we see multimodal projects receiving priority. There should be an emphasis on railways, cable cars, the river projects, and also airports and public transport. The government has also announced investments of about $1.7 billion for now through 2026 for tertiary roads, which would be a mechanism to promote connectivity and rural development. Moving over to Ecuador, the government there of Guillermo Lasso will be looking in 2023 to create instruments to strengthen the country's competitiveness and at the same time guarantee bankability to obtain private financing for its rather ambitious portfolio of projects, which in numerous areas, infrastructure and also oil and electricity, currently totals about $50 billion worth of projects. The Lasso administration does face, however, multiple political and security challenges that could undermine its success. Between 2022 and 2023, the government had hoped to put out to tender projects requiring investment of around $6 billion, but amid a heated political environment, the plans went on pause, and it is expected that in 2023, some of these tenders could be completed. Ecuador now is working on drawing up standard contracts for construction. The idea is to reduce the discretion of officials when it comes to approving bids for infrastructure projects. However, again, the investment climate could be clouded by the legislature's constant opposition to Lasso's legislative initiatives. Lasso has low popularity, and we are observing a growing climate of violence and insecurity in the country. All of these factors are really making it difficult for Lasso to move ahead with his programs. In addition, elections for mayors and other local authorities are planned for February in Ecuador, and that can slow down projects at the local level. And again, Lasso's lack of support in Congress is making it difficult for him to pass laws. So this is going to influence Ecuador's infrastructure agenda next year. And lastly, looking at Peru, the focus in Peru we see is on reactivating blocked projects. Peru has a number of large infrastructure projects that have struggled to advance. So the country is looking to speed up progress at ongoing projects, unblock block projects, and the idea obviously is to stimulate the economy. The country's new national plan for sustainable infrastructure for competitiveness was unveiled in October by the administration of President Pedro Castillo, and it's an update of infrastructure plans of previous governments, and is to be the guide for development in the short and medium term. But there still haven't been any clear mechanisms announced to promote this plan. Large projects in the country, for example, Line 2 of the Lima Metro, the expansion of the Jorge Chavez International Airport in Lima, and port terminals. These are expected to continue their progress in a sustained manner. But at a general level, there could be a contraction in the infrastructure sector. There will be an entry of new governors, regional governors in Peru, which could slow down public execution of projects, while the high cost of financing is going to limit the development of new projects in the short term. We talked to folks at Scotiabank. They're expecting a 0.5 percentage point drop in the construction sector and contractions of 2.3% for private investment and 3.5% of public investment in Peru next year. Another point that could hinder the projects of progress is scrutiny from the labor ministry in Peru. There had been a prohibition of labor outsourcing after social protests demanding jobs at projects. And while this prohibition was suspended, the regulation of indirect employment in Peru is seen by legal experts as continuing to present a barrier to projects, where the labor ministry is expected to very aggressively monitor projects next year, and that could limit the potential of the construction sector because it does depend very heavily on third-party labor. Political stability also continues to be an issue in Peru. There have been 5 changes in transport minister since Castillo took office mid-2021, and that has made it quite difficult for the state to monitor, advance, and resolve disputes around important projects such as Line 2 of the Lima Metro. And on more than one occasion, there have been delays due to delays in the delivery of concession areas by the ministry. As I said, like Ecuador, Peru also has these local elections scheduled for 2023, which could result in a slowdown in projects as these new administrations settle in and review projects. So with that, we'll conclude this session on the outlook for infrastructure in Latin America in 2023. I would like to remind all BNamericas clients that our infrastructure outlook report is ready to read or to download in our report section of our platform. In 2023, we will continue to cover the main trends and conversation topics with our experts on the ground, while adding hundreds of new projects to our database every month. Thank you very much and have a nice day.